Check her bag, my daughter-in-law hissed, her manicured finger pointing directly at me as two uniformed officers stood awkwardly in my living room. My own son David stood beside her, his jaw tight, his arms crossed, as if he were ashamed of me. She's hiding drugs. She's been using. That's why she's so unstable. We can't keep letting her live here if she's going to bring shame to the family. I froze where I stood, clutching the edge of the oak coffee table, my hands trembling, not from guilt but from the sheer audacity of the accusation. Drugs. I whispered, my silver-gray hair falling loose from the bun at the back of my head. I've never touched a pill outside what the doctor prescribes. You know that. David wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably and muttered, Mom, just cooperate. If you've got nothing to hide, then it won't matter. It hit me like a slap. Not just his words, but the way his voice carried an edge of contempt, the way he looked at me as if I were already guilty. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, cleared his throat. Ma'am, do you mind if we have a look? It'll only take a moment. My heart pounded, not from fear of what they'd find, but from what I already suspected, that Samantha had planted something. She had been circling me for months, always watching, always trying to edge her way into the center of the house, the finances, my son's ear. Now I knew exactly how far she'd go. Fine, I said, my voice steady though my knees felt weak. I handed over the leather handbag I carried everywhere. My fingers brushed the smooth strap, and I prayed silently that I was wrong. But I wasn't. The officer reached in, his gloved hand pulling out a small plastic bag filled with white powder. The room fell silent. My stomach dropped. My son's eyes flickered with something almost like triumph before he quickly masked it with a look of forced disappointment. There. Samantha shrieked, covering her mouth in mock horror. I told you. She's an addict, and she refuses to get help. David, you see? We can't trust her with the money, with the estate, with anything. My world tilted. I took a step back, shaking my head violently. That's not mine. I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of rage and betrayal. You planted it, Samantha. You think I don't know? You've been scheming for months. The officers looked at each other again, uncomfortable. The tall one shifted his weight, clearly unconvinced by the theatrical display. But procedure demanded they treat it as evidence. David finally looked at me, but his eyes were hard cold. Mom, he said flatly, this is serious. You're embarrassing yourself. Why don't you just admit it? Admit it? My chest ached, but not from fear. It was the ache of betrayal, the ache only a mother can feel when the child she carried, raised, sacrificed for, stood aligned with someone who wanted to erase her. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about drugs. It wasn't even about dignity. It was about $85 million in estate, property, and business shares that I had painstakingly built alongside my late husband. Samantha wanted it. David wanted it. And together, they had decided the easiest way to secure it was to destroy me before I could decide otherwise. But what they didn't know was that I hadn't survived decades of hardship, loss, and sacrifice just to be erased by two greedy opportunists. They thought they'd framed me into a corner. What they didn't expect was that the woman they underestimated had already begun building her own quiet storm. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe, turn on the bell, and comment where you're watching from, because what came next will leave you questioning just how far family betrayal can go. The officers, to their credit, didn't slap handcuffs on me immediately. They asked questions, wrote things down, treated me with a professionalism I clung to like a lifeline. But it didn't erase the humiliation. My neighbors saw the patrol car outside. They whispered, just as Samantha had hoped they would. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, my hands shaking as I stared at the neatly framed photographs of my late husband on the wall. His smile seemed to mock me, or maybe it urged me on, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that Samantha had crossed a line, and David had followed her straight into the abyss. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out a leather-bound folder. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years, business records, trust paperwork, letters my husband and I had written long ago when we were planning our legacy. My hands steadied as I flipped through the pages. They thought the will was simple. They thought I would leave everything to David automatically. But my husband had been cautious, and I had been wiser still. Safeguards existed. Clauses. Conditions. And now, those very protections would become my weapon. I knew I couldn't strike back openly, not yet. Samantha was crafty, and David was her puppet. They'd use any retaliation against me. But silence? Silence was something they'd never expect. Silence was power. So I stayed quiet. I smiled when Samantha gloated at breakfast. I nodded when David suggested maybe I get some rest at a facility. I let them believe the plan was working. All the while, I was watching. Waiting. The first step was to let them think I was broken. The second would be to show them just how wrong they were. Because if Samantha wanted to play games with drugs and police calls, I was ready to play something far deadlier. And the house she thought she was stealing? It would be the very place her schemes unraveled. "Don't think we're done," Samantha said coldly the next morning, her voice carrying across the kitchen like the hiss of a snake. She stood by the marble counter, her silk robe tied lazily at her waist, sipping orange juice with the arrogance of someone who believed the game was already won. David sat at the breakfast table, his newspaper folded but unread, his jaw tight, his silence an accomplice to her cruelty. "We're calling the lawyer this week. It's time the estate was properly transferred. Clearly, you're not fit to manage it anymore. Not after last night." I sat opposite them, cardigan buttoned tightly over my floral dress, silver gray bun pinned neatly, spoon stirring my coffee though I had no intention of drinking it. My face betrayed nothing, though my chest burned with rage. "Transferred?" I asked, my voice low, steady. "The estate is mine. Your father's legacy. My life's work. You'll get what's due when I'm gone, not before." David slammed his palm on the table, startling the spoon against my cup. "Mom, stop acting like this. You're making everything harder. If you cared about family, you'd sign it over. We're not going to wait around while you waste away." There it was, the motive laid bare. Not love. Not protection. Just $85 million that he and Samantha had already spent in their minds. I studied my son's face, once so gentle as a boy, now hardened by greed. Samantha smirked, pleased that her poison had taken root in him so fully. What they didn't know was that while they schemed, I had already begun my own quiet war. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're from, because what I did next is the kind of revenge you won't see coming. The days that followed were filled with humiliation carefully designed to break me. Samantha whispered to neighbors on the street, hand pressed dramatically to her chest as she feigned sorrow. "It's so sad," she said loudly enough for me to hear while I watered my roses. "She's using. We found drugs. The police came. Can you imagine? At her age." I kept my eyes on the roses, pruning sheer steady, though my heart raged. My neighbor's pitying stares cut deeper than any blade. That was Samantha's true gift. She didn't just try to steal money, she tried to steal dignity. David wasn't far behind her. He took control of small things first, the checkbook left on the counter, the keys to my late husband's study, the business phone. He assured me it was just a help, but I recognized theft dressed in convenience. At night, I heard them whispering in their bedroom, their voices sharp, their laughter cruel. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I walked silently through the house I had built, cardigan wrapped tight, steps steady, ears sharp. I watched. I listened. I remembered every detail. One evening, they staged another spectacle. Samantha invited her parents, smug and overdressed, for dinner. The moment I stepped into the dining room, she clapped her hands. "Before we eat, we need to talk about Mom's situation." She looked directly at me, her lips curling. "David and I can't keep cleaning up her messes. The drugs, the instability. We need guardianship before she squanders everything." Her parents gasped theatrically. David avoided my eyes but didn't object. I placed my napkin on my lap with deliberate calm. "Guardianship," I repeated softly. "Over me." Samantha leaned forward, eyes glittering. "It's for your own good." I smiled then, not the smile of defeat, but the smile of someone who knows something the enemy does not. They mistook it for fragility, for weakness. In truth, it was the smile of war. The next morning, I drove to the office of Harold Jennings, the attorney my husband and I had trusted for 3 decades. He was a patient man with snow-white hair and round spectacles, and when I laid out the events of the past week, his jaw tightened in anger. They planted evidence, he said, tapping his pen against the desk. And your son sided with her? Yes, I said quietly, folding my hands on my lap. They think it makes me powerless. They're already planning to transfer the estate. Harold leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Then it's time we remind them whose name is on every deed, every trust, every account. They can try all the games they want, but the law is not on their side. Relief washed over me, but it was not enough. I didn't just want to protect what was mine, I wanted them exposed. I wanted their greed to consume them so completely that they'd choke on it. We reviewed the documents, a trust with ironclad clauses, a will with conditions David could never meet in his state of betrayal. Safeguards my husband and I had insisted on decades ago, anticipating that greed might one day twist even family against us. As I left Harold's office, clutching the updated documents close to my chest, I whispered, "You wanted war, Samantha. Now you'll have it." Back at home, they were waiting. David stood by the door, arms crossed, expression sour. Samantha lounged on the couch, flipping through one of my old photo albums as if it belonged to her. "Where have you been?" David demanded. "The market," I said smoothly, holding up a small bag of groceries. Samantha smirked. "Funny. You don't smell like onions." I placed the bag on the counter, my cardigan sleeve brushing the edge. "Suspicion doesn't suit you, Samantha," I said calmly. "Paranoia makes you sloppy." Her smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but then she laughed. "Oh, Margaret, you're so dramatic. Maybe we should talk about a retirement home. A place where you'll be safe and quiet." I turned my gaze to David. "And you'd let her do that? To your own mother?" His eyes flickered, but he stayed silent. Silence was its own kind of betrayal. I walked past them, climbing the stairs without another word. In my room, I shut the door, my hands steady. The war had begun, and soon they'd discover that the woman they tried to bury was the very one holding the shovel. The breaking point came days later when they staged their boldest attack yet. The police returned, not for me this time, but for a wellness check called in by Samantha. She stood in the driveway, crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks, telling the officers I was unstable, dangerous even. David nodded along, his face a mask of grim concern. I stepped out onto the porch, cardigan neat, bun tidy, face calm. "Officers," I said politely, "thank you for your concern. Please come inside." They followed me in. Samantha trailed behind, expecting to find chaos, filth, proof of her lies. Instead she found order, polished floors, neatly stacked bills, fresh flowers in a vase. The officers exchanged glances, one raising an eyebrow. Samantha's tears dried quickly. "Well," she stammered, "she must have cleaned up before you came." I tilted my head, meeting her eyes directly. "Some of us don't need to clean up lies, Samantha. We live without them." The officers left shortly after, their notes brief, their skepticism clear. That night, Samantha's rage filled the house like smoke. She shouted at David, pacing the hallways, her voice sharp. "She's ruining everything. If we don't get control soon, we'll lose it all." I sat in my room, listening, calm. Because they didn't yet realize they'd already lost. Betrayal burns hottest when it comes from blood, but greed? Greed eats its own. And I was simply setting the table for their feast. Because the next step wasn't me defending myself. It was me letting them expose themselves so fully that even David, blinded by Samantha's charms, couldn't deny what she really was. And when that moment came, I'd be ready, not just to protect my fortune, but to ensure they never forgot the day they tried to frame me and failed. "Sign this," Samantha said one evening, sliding a thick envelope across the dining table as though she were sliding me a menu. Her lips curled in a smug little smile, and her diamond earrings glinted under the chandelier. "It's a revised estate agreement. Nothing scary. Just ensures that when the time comes, everything transfers smoothly to David, and to me. No unnecessary delays, no lawyers fighting over scraps. Don't you want peace of mind?" David sat across from me, his shirt collar open, his face pale and tired. He looked anywhere but at me. "Mom," he muttered, "it's just paperwork. Everyone does it. Why fight us?" I lifted the envelope slowly, feeling its weight in my hands. I could almost hear my late husband's voice in the back of my mind, sharp and steady, read everything twice. Never sign under pressure. A signature is the last weapon you have. My cardigan sleeve brushed the paper as I slid it back across the table. My silver-gray bun was tight, my face unreadable. No, I said simply. Samantha's eyes narrowed. No? She repeated, her voice sharp. Do you even know what you're saying no to? You're old, Margaret. You don't have the strength for this. And the police already have a file on you. You think you can survive another scandal? You'll be dragged out of here in handcuffs, humiliated in front of everyone. That was her betrayal in full bloom, weaponizing fear, humiliation, and family. But I had lived too long to be shaken by words. What Samantha didn't know was that I had begun gathering my own weapons. If you're watching this, I said quietly in my mind, already picturing the audience who would hear my story one day, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're from, because this was the night I realized how to turn their trap into my revenge. I began quietly. First, I spoke with my lawyer, Harold. We drafted letters, notarized documents, built a chain of evidence so strong no court would dare ignore it. Then, on Harold's advice, I bought a small recording device. It was no bigger than a matchbox, easily hidden in a cardigan pocket or beneath a vase on the dining table. The first night I used it, I caught them mid-argument in the kitchen. She's stubborn, Samantha hissed, her voice sharp like glass breaking. But don't worry. Once she slips again, I'll make sure the police find twice as much as before. Next time she won't get out. David's voice followed, low and uncertain. What if she figures it out? What if she changes the will? She won't, Samantha snapped. She's too weak, too old. Besides, by the time anyone asks questions, everything will already be in our names. I sat upstairs in my bedroom, the recording playing softly through my headphones. My hands didn't shake. They steadied. For the first time, I had proof, not just suspicion, not just betrayal whispered in shadows. Proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. Samantha was cunning, David was easily swayed. If I went to the police too soon, she would spin another lie, paint me as unstable. I needed to let her weave the rope with her own hands, until it tightened around her neck. So I played the role she wanted. I stumbled once or twice in the hallway, pretending weakness. I asked David to fetch me things I could easily reach, letting him believe I was dependent. I let Samantha think her whispers had broken me. All the while, my little recorder caught every poisonous word she spilled into the air. The tension at home grew thicker by the day. Samantha, emboldened, invited her friends over. They laughed in my living room, sipping wine as she spun tales about me. Can you believe it? 85 million tied up by a woman who doesn't even know what year it is half the time. Her friends giggled, tossing their blonde hair and clicking their glasses together, glancing at me with pity disguised as curiosity. I sat in the armchair, cardigan buttoned, bun neat, my face calm. I let them think I didn't hear. But the recorder, tucked beneath the cushion, heard everything. Later that night, I whispered into the darkness, "Every word you speak is another nail in your coffin, Samantha." The cracks in David began to show. I caught him in the garage one night, sitting in his car with his head in his hands. He didn't see me watching from the doorway. "What are we doing?" he muttered to himself, his voice breaking. "She's my mother." For a moment, I almost stepped forward, almost laid a hand on his shoulder. But then I remembered the way he had stood beside Samantha when the police searched my bag, his eyes cold, his voice flat. Sympathy could wait. Justice could not. The second attempt came a week later. I returned from the grocery store to find 2 officers waiting at the door again. Samantha stood between them, crocodile tears running down her cheeks. "She's unstable," she cried. "She threatened me. Please, you have to take her in before she hurts herself, or us." David nodded solemnly, playing his role. The officers looked at me, their faces weary. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions." I invited them in, calm as ever. But this time, I was ready. I pulled the small recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Samantha's voice filled the room. "Once she slips again, I'll make sure the police find twice as much as before. Next time she won't get out." The officers froze. Samantha's face drained of color. David's mouth fell open. "I believe that clears things up," I said softly, folding my hands on the table. The officers exchanged looks. One muttered, "We'll be in touch." They left quickly, leaving silence in their wake. Samantha turned on me, her face twisted with rage. "You." But I raised my hand, silencing her. "You wanted to frame me. Now the law has heard your own words. How long do you think it'll take before they come back with real questions? Questions you can't answer with tears." She stood frozen, her chest heaving, her hands trembling with fury. David looked between us, pale and sweating, his loyalty beginning to crack. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the electric hum of victory beginning to pulse through me. The storm was gathering, and I had become its center. Samantha thought she was the puppeteer, pulling strings with whispers and lies. What she didn't realize was that I had cut her strings one by one, until she dangled above the very pit she dug for me. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're from, because what came next made her lies collapse in front of the entire family, and even my son could no longer protect her. "Call everyone," Samantha snapped one Thursday morning, her silk blouse wrinkled from a night of pacing. She stormed around the kitchen, flinging open drawers, rattling cutlery like a woman unraveling. Her face was pale under layers of makeup, her eyes dark with sleepless rage. "We'll get ahead of this before she ruins us. Invite your uncles, your cousins, the lawyer. If she wants to humiliate us, then we'll put her on trial in her own home." David sat at the counter, rubbing his temples. His shirt was buttoned wrong, his hair uncombed, his eyes tired. "Sam, maybe we should slow down," he muttered. "The recording, it's not nothing. What if—" "Don't be weak," she cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice steel. "She's playing you. She's always played you. She'll twist it until you're nothing but her errand boy again. Do you want that? Or do you want $85 million? Her greed was naked now, spilling into the air like poison. David glanced at me, standing in the doorway with my cardigan buttoned neatly, my silver-gray bun pinned tight. His face flushed, guilt flashing across it, but he stayed silent. Silence had become his refuge. I stepped into the kitchen slowly, my hands folded in front of me. "Invite whoever you like," I said softly. "Sometimes the best courtroom is the family table." Samantha froze, her glass of juice trembling in her hand. She recovered quickly, sneering. "Oh, you'll regret this." But I smiled faintly. "No, Samantha. You will." If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me where you're from, because what unfolded at that so-called family meeting turned into her greatest undoing. By Sunday, the house buzzed with voices. Relatives filled the living room, uncles with tired eyes, cousins with skeptical expressions, nieces whispering in corners. They had all heard pieces of the story through gossip, through Samantha's carefully planted whispers. Now they had come to see the spectacle for themselves. Samantha stood at the front of the room like a prosecutor, dressed in a sharp navy dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. David hovered beside her, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Thank you all for coming," Samantha began, her voice syrupy and false. "We're here because Margaret, well, she's struggling. We've had to call the police more than once. We found things. And frankly, it's unsafe to leave the estate in her hands. David and I are prepared to take responsibility. But we need your support." Murmurs rippled through the room. My brother Henry frowned deeply, shaking his head. My niece Allison whispered, "Drugs? That doesn't sound like her." I rose slowly from my armchair, my pale blue cardigan wrapped around me, my hands steady. "May I speak?" I asked softly. Samantha smiled coldly. "Of course. We want transparency." I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the small recorder. The room quieted instantly. I set it on the coffee table and pressed play. Her voice filled the air. "Once she slips again, I'll make sure the police find twice as much as before. Next time she won't get out." Gasps erupted. My relatives turned to stare at Samantha, whose face drained of color. She lurched forward, trying to snatch the device, but David caught her wrist instinctively. "Sam, what is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. She stammered, She twisted it, she edited." But the damage was done. Her words had been heard by everyone. My brother Henry rose to his feet, pointing a finger at her. You framed her? You brought police into this house? For money. The room erupted in outrage. My relatives shouted, voices overlapping. Shameful. You tried to ruin her life. All for greed. David staggered back, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His loyalty crumbled in front of everyone. Sam, he whispered, his voice broken, tell me it isn't true. Samantha's eyes darted wildly, but there was no escape. She hissed, we needed the money, David. She wasn't going to give it to us. It was the only way. Silence fell. Her confession hung in the air like smoke. I stood tall, my cardigan neat, my bun steady, my voice clear. You see, I said softly, turning to the family. It was never about my health. Never about my well-being. It was about $85 million. And they would have destroyed me to get it. The weight of truth settled. My family's eyes, once filled with doubt, now burned with shame, not for me but for them. The fallout was swift. Relatives cornered David afterward, demanding explanations. Samantha tried to spin excuses, but no one listened. The trust was broken, the mask shattered. That evening, Harold the lawyer arrived, summoned by my quiet phone call. He stood in the foyer, briefcase in hand, spectacles glinting under the chandelier. I understand there's confusion about the estate, he said, his voice firm. Samantha's head snapped toward him, panic in her eyes. We have agreements, papers she's refused to sign. Harold laid out the documents on the dining table. Agreements, he repeated, his tone edged with steel. Let me remind everyone, this estate is bound by a trust your father and Margaret built decades ago. Ironclad. Conditional. And unless David fulfills those conditions, honor, stability, respect, he inherits nothing. Gasps circled the table. Samantha's face twisted in fury. You can't do this, she screamed. We've lived here for years. We deserve it. But Harold only smiled thinly. The law doesn't recognize greed as a qualification. David sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Samantha's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. That night, the house was quiet, but not peaceful. I heard them arguing in their room, their voices raw. You ruined us, David shouted, his voice breaking. She has proof. The family knows. Harold knows. What have you done? Samantha's reply was a hiss, I did it for us. For you. You're too blind to see. Their words tumbled through the walls like cracks splintering wood. I lay in my bed, cardigan folded neatly on the chair, smiling faintly in the dark. Because for the first time, David's faith in her was broken. The seeds of doubt had taken root. And once doubt grows, trust never returns. The next morning, Samantha tried one last tactic. She cornered me in the kitchen, her silk robe slipping from one shoulder, her eyes wild. You think you've won? She spat. You humiliated me in front of everyone. But David is mine. He'll never choose you over me. I stirred my tea calmly, my silver gray bun perfectly pinned, my voice quiet. He doesn't have to choose. You've already lost. The family knows. The law knows. And soon he'll know too. Her face twisted. I'll make you regret this. I met her gaze steadily. No, Samantha. You'll regret it. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next wasn't just her downfall, it was her complete erasure from everything she thought she had won. Get out of my way. Samantha screamed, her voice echoing through the marble foyer like shattering glass. She was dressed for battle, gold earrings dangling, lipstick smeared, hair half-pinned, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. She clutched a folder of papers in her hand, waving them like a weapon. David trailed behind her, his face pale, sweat shining on his temples. We're going back to the lawyer. We're contesting everything. She won't get away with this. I stood at the top of the staircase, cardigan buttoned neatly over my dress, my silver gray bun pinned tight, my hands folded on the banister. Samantha, I said softly, my voice calm but cutting, you've already lost. This house, this estate, these walls, they are not yours. They never were. Her face twisted, her red nails digging into the folder. Don't lecture me. You've ruined everything. We had it all, and now," her voice cracked. "Now everyone sees me as the villain." David flinched at her words. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. The silence between us was louder than any accusation. That was the betrayal in full, her rage boiling over, his cowardice hanging heavy. But what they didn't know was that I had prepared one last card to play, one final revelation that would strip away every mask they still wore. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and comment where you're watching from, because what unfolded next was the kind of downfall you rarely see outside of stories, the kind that ends not in fire, but in ash. The confrontation escalated quickly. Samantha stormed into the dining room, slamming her papers onto the table as relatives and Harold, the lawyer, gathered once more. "These," she shouted, her voice shrill. "These prove she's unfit. Bank records, medical bills, reports. She's unstable, and she's been hiding it." She spread the papers like a magician revealing tricks. But Harold leaned forward, spectacles low on his nose, and examined them carefully. His lips pressed into a thin line. "These aren't originals," he said flatly. "These are forgeries." Gasps filled the room. Samantha froze, her face draining of color. David staggered back a step, staring at her. "Forgeries?" he whispered. "Yes," Harold continued, tapping the papers with a sharp finger. "These signatures are traced. These documents are altered. Whoever created them committed fraud, and quite clumsily at that." The room erupted in whispers. Cousins exchanged glances, uncles muttered curses, nieces shook their heads in disgust. Samantha's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. "Sam." David's voice cracked. "You did this." She whirled on him, desperation twisting her features. "I did it for us. For you. For our future." "No," he whispered, his voice broken. "You did it for yourself." That was the crack that shattered everything. David sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Samantha lunged for him, grabbing his shoulders, but he pushed her away. "You lied to me," he said, his voice rising. "You made me turn on my own mother. You made me watch her be humiliated, accused, treated like a criminal. And for what? For money." Tears streaked Samantha's cheeks, black mascara running down in lines. "We needed it," she shrieked. "We deserved it." She was going to waste it all. I stepped forward then, my cardigan neat, my bun unshaken, my voice clear. "You thought 85 million would make you powerful. But all it's done is show the world who you really are. Greed doesn't buy dignity. Lies don't buy legacy. And betrayal doesn't buy family." Samantha's chest heaved, her eyes wild. She looked around the room, searching for allies, but found none. Every face was turned against her now. Even David's. Especially David's. The collapse was public and merciless. Within days, the forged documents were handed over to the authorities. Investigations began. Samantha's friends vanished, her reputation crumbled, her name became a warning whispered at charity luncheons and dinner tables. Don't be like her. Don't let greed make you a criminal. David, stripped of her influence, came to me one evening. He stood in the doorway of my study, shoulders hunched, his once proud posture gone. "Mom," he said softly, his voice raw, "I'm sorry." I looked up from my desk, my hands folded on the will that protected everything his father and I had built. "Sorry," I repeated quietly. He swallowed hard. "I was blind. I let her poison me. I let her make me see you as the enemy. His voice broke. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I studied him for a long moment, the boy I had raised now a man broken by choices he made. "You don't," I said honestly. "But forgiveness isn't a gift for you, David. It's for me. And I can't forgive, not yet. Maybe not ever. Some wounds don't close." His eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly, then left the room without another word. Samantha's downfall reached its peak when the police came, not for me, as she had once orchestrated, but for her. I watched from the porch, cardigan wrapped around my shoulders, as officers led her away in handcuffs. Her blonde hair was messy, her makeup smeared, her eyes red from crying. Neighbors gathered, whispering, their eyes wide. "Isn't that Samantha?" Didn't she call the police on her own mother-in-law? Now she's the one being arrested. Poetic justice hung in the air like perfume. David stood on the lawn, his face pale, watching silently. He didn't defend her. He didn't even move. After she was gone, the house grew quieter. I walked through the halls, my footsteps steady, my hands brushing the walls that had witnessed every betrayal, every lie, every tear. The silence wasn't lonely. It was dignified. I sat on the porch swing that evening, the mansion glowing warmly behind me, the dogs curled at my feet. My silver-gray bun was neat, my cardigan wrapped tight against the cool night. I thought of my late husband, of the years we had built together, of the empire Samantha had tried to steal with tricks and lies. She had failed. Because money can be stolen, signatures can be forged, lies can be whispered, but dignity cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered. And I had refused. If you're watching this, hear me, betrayal may come dressed as family. It may come with a smile, with a gentle hand, with the promise of love. But when greed reveals its face, you must be ready. Ready to endure. Ready to fight quietly, with patience, with dignity, until their own lies consume them. Samantha framed me with drugs, called the police, dragged my name through the mud. My son stood by her, blind with greed. They thought they had me cornered. They thought 85 million would make me surrender. But I stood. And in the end, Samantha lost everything, not because I destroyed her, but because greed always destroys itself. So subscribe, share this story, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because dignity doesn't just survive betrayal, it outlives it.